Hello, everyone. Welcome to Take Back My Brain. I'm your host, Laurie Hammer, and tonight I have a very special guest. I'm very honored that she has been able to take some time to meet with me. Her name is Christina Veselak. She is the founder of the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Solutions. She is a psychotherapist, has been doing this for years and years and years. She is an expert in addiction recovery, as well as stress and anxiety, and as all of you know, my favorite topic, amino acid therapy. So I'm very excited to have you here, Christina. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Lori. I love sharing this information and having conversations with like-minded professionals.
Yes, absolutely. I am so curious because I don't honestly know your complete backstory. I followed you for years, listened to you, all your wisdom, all those kind of things. But how did you get into this area of psychotherapy, amino acid therapy, and addiction?
You know, it really starts when I was 16,
Okay.
and I ended up in a boarding school in England that was advertised to be, for the top students who were really serious and really wanted to get into the best universities in England, which is why I was at that school. However, it turned out that the school was the last resort for parents to get their very juvenile delinquent teenagers through the exams and into any school at all.
Oh, no.
And so there were 100 students in the school, and five of us were serious and clean and sober,
Oh, my.
and 95 of them weren't so much.
Okay.
What is it? Drug, sex, and rock and roll.
Right. Well, that's an
And they
interesting academic venue.
No, except that the teachers were excellent.
Oh, good.
And so I was actually getting college level classes in chemistry and biology, and all of that was wonderful. Um, but the milieu was challenging and very, very tragic.
Oh,
And so my first roommate, who was 16, the daughter of a very famous British novelist, um, was addicted to everything under the sun, tried to get clean and sober, asked me if I would help her. And my little codependent heart thought this was the most wonderful thing in the world.
sure.
And we did really well for 6, 8 weeks until she decided to move in with real friends. And I saw her spiral down over, the next several months. I didn't see much of her,
Wow.
but she ended up looking like a wraith
Oh,
and dropping out of school. And I found out a long time later that she died of an overdose at the age of 30.
ugh. Okay.
Well, this broke my heart,
Yeah.
and other very bad things happened at this school, and I won't go into it, but there was drug smuggling, and there was, oh, I mean, as nasty could be, that went to the top levels of the police.
Wow. Okay.
And so I left that school pretty traumatized. But I think in my heart, because my heart was broken because of this dear girl, I think that's why I ended up an addiction counselor. But in school, in my master's program, it was no, I'm not going to have anything to do with addiction. I'm here to become a mental health therapist, a family therapist, and addiction can stay way over there.
Not touching that.
I am not touching that with a 1,000-foot pole.
Right. Right.
So I didn't take any of the elective classes on anything to do with addiction. So
Wow.
I'm out of school and I'm looking for work and I'm looking for work and I'm looking for work and I'm looking for an internship and I'm looking for hours and, towards my license. And this ad in the newspaper, we had newspapers back then, and we kept staring at each other. For 4 months, this ad and I stared at each other. It was for floor staff at a residential treatment program for court-ordered teenage alcoholic boys.
Very good. Not an
Uh-huh.
easy ad to answer.
And it was like, nope, no, 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 no. No, no, no. And after 4 months, I started getting a little hungry.
Uh-huh.
So I answered the ad, and I think they were getting a little hungry too. And they hired me on the spot. I said, I know nothing about addiction. They said, we will teach you. And
Uh-huh.
they did. So this is known as, Laurie, this is known as baptism by fire.
Right. On the job training.
On the job trainer, and here we were with teenage alcoholics again.
Mm,
Um, and I found out during my 2 years there that maybe I didn't love conduct disorder teenage boys. Okay.
hmm
But I loved addiction. I
Uh,
loved the field. I loved the families. I discovered my own codependency. I discovered the own addiction in my family, and I was hooked. I was
wow.
hooked.
Uh-huh.
And so I started to practice focusing on adult children and focusing on families and codependency, little bit of addiction work. But in my private practice, well, I also ran a family program at a hospital for a while
Okay.
and just loved it. I'd always been interested in nutrition because I'd been ill my whole life. I had found out that, and I'd been depressed my whole life, that I had an allergy to eggs and that eggs made me depressed. I discovered this in college. So I had an interest in nutrition. And
Sure.
my mother had always been nutritionally oriented. So when this press release appeared, somewhere in the late 80s, I'd say, very, very early 90s, press release appeared about this nutritionally oriented outpatient treatment program in Mill Valley, California, run by this lady called Julia Ross.
Yep.
I was intrigued. And so I went and visited Julia and her then nutritionist, Crispin Sullivan.
hmm
And was so impressed by Crispin that I made an appointment with her to see if she could figure out what had been wrong with me my whole entire life,
hmm
because I'd been chronically ill my whole life. And she figured it out. And I was so impressed by that that I went and got the same training that Crispin had.
Uh-huh.
But meanwhile, I was tagging along behind Julia as she was teaching about amino acids and eating disorders and addiction all through the Bay Area. And then I started meeting with her rep, Don Tyson.
hmm
And every Friday at lunch, he would start teaching me about amino acids. So I trained with Don Tyson,
Yeah.
primarily and a little
Brilliant.
bit with Julia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how I get introduced to amino acid therapy in, I'd say, 1990.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then I got certified as a nutritionist in 1993, started going to all of the pre-functional medicine lectures on functional medicine before the term was even
Before it was
coined.
cool. Yeah.
Well, before the word was even coined,
Right.
right?
Right.
And, back there they were still calling it alternative medicine. And I really developed a specialty in mental health nutrition and nutrition for addiction recovery. And then in 1998, I moved to Denver. And in 2001, I started my practice in Denver again and thoroughly, completely integrated mental health nutrition into my practice as an primary addiction counselor, relapse prevention counselor and psychotherapist, and specialized on the addiction side of things in working with the chronic relapser,
Okay.
the person who'd been through 3, 4, 5 programs, the person who was going to 3 AA meetings a day by bus because they didn't have a driver's license anymore and was still relapsing.
Right.
And so everybody would send me their failures. I said, bring them on. I want your failures.
hmm
And we would troubleshoot, and I'd figure out most of the time what was getting in their way and clear out the blockades, and people would start getting clean and sober and stop relapsing. But one of the things I found that almost everybody had in common, Laurie, is that they couldn't be bothered to eat.
Right? That is so true. I still see that. Yes.
Yeah, they didn't have an eating disorder. They were too busy or they were too whatever. And end result, they just weren't eating. They were grabbing
Right.
something here, grabbing something there, and then wondering why they kept relapsing and why they were miserable. And so this is where I learned to ask people, and I've been asking this question now for over 25 years. When was the last time you ate protein prior to your slip, your craving, your relapse, your domestic violence incident, your
Right.
child abuse incident, your panic attack?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, people looked at me blankly and said, early this morning, yesterday,
Yeah.
or what's protein? Is an apple. An apple that has protein, doesn't it?
Yep.
And I would say, well, apples are really good for you, and I'd love for you to eat one a day, but no, apples are not a great source of protein.
Mhm.
Um, and so getting these people eating protein every 4 hours changed their lives. It just changed their lives
Yeah.
very, very quickly. And I could realize I could turn off a craving, a full-blown physical craving, in 20 minutes using either a meal or a targeted amino acid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nobody in the medical profession can do that,
Nope.
okay, without medication.
Yep.
And most of the time I can, which is a very bold statement, except I saw it happen over and over and over and over again.
Right.
So that's why in 2015, I started my school, the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition, to teach professionals, both mental health professionals as well as functional nutrition professionals, how to do this too.
Yeah.
And then about 2 years ago, I started my nonprofit, Eating Protein Saves Lives, and to really teach people how to do this. And it's in process. It's not where I want it to be yet, but there's wonderful information on that website already.
Yes.
And any donations would be welcome because it's all coming,
I'll put that in the show notes, Christina.
thank you.
Yes.
Lots of educational materials. For instance, I was at an addiction conference this last week for for pain medicine doctors.
Oh, uh-huh.
And it was a very good conference, but people loved my posters. People, you see, I have this wonderful little poster, eat protein every 4 hours to help reduce cravings and relapse. And I have a whole bunch of other posters and educational material, and people were fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, Laurie? They keep saying, oh, that makes sense.
Right.
That makes so much sense. You're connecting the dots for me, but I've never heard it before. I've
Right. And
never
it's
heard
so
it before.
foundational. It's just food.
And then I say, the research goes back to the 1960s. They say, is this evidence-based? It's like, yes.
Yes, it is. What does protein do in the body, right? It feeds your brain amongst a
It
bazillion
feeds your
other things.
brain.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not just your muscle.
Yep. Yep. So can you expand on what eating protein every 4 hours actually does?
Yes. And I'm going to start with what happens when we don't.
Perfect.
So what happens when we skip a meal or we eat a very high carb meal is that blood sugar ends up dropping for some people very, very low. And I can talk about actual reactive hypoglycemia in a minute. But when blood sugar drops very low, adrenaline kicks in. The first thing that happens when blood sugar drops very low is that we lose willpower. Research has shown that the prefrontal cortex requires a consistent supply of glucose. I mean, unless you're fully keto,
Right.
right? It
Right.
requires a consistent supply of glucose to function. And if you don't get it, willpower goes out the window.
That is true.
Okay,
Yes.
so first of all, you skip a meal or two or four, and you lose willpower. Or you eat sugar, blood sugar goes up, blood sugar comes down, and you lose willpower. Then adrenaline kicks in because adrenaline's job is to release stored sugar, glucagon, back into the bloodstream to get it back up to baseline.
Mhm.
Does that beautifully. Adrenaline beautifully gets blood sugar levels back up at least to baseline. But what else does adrenaline do? It destabilizes us. It makes us anxious, agitated, reactive, angry, panicky, confused, shaky, right?
Mhm.
Well, if we have a relationship with an addictive substance or behavior and we're destabilized, the brain has a foundational drive towards homeostasis.
Right.
And it uses its drug or behavior of choice to maintain homeostasis. So the research is well in that when we are destabilized, we get a automatic conditioned response craving in the brain over which we have no control. It's completely out of our control. It's purely biochemical to
Mhm.
reach for our drug or behavior of choice.
Right. And I don't think people really understand that because they're like, well, why can't you just stop? Why can't you just stop being an alcoholic? Why can't you stop being a heroin addict? Why can't you just not eat that sugar? Right?
That they don't realize it's way that when we have an addiction, we have lost control, we have lost choice,
Hmm.
and it is literally out of our hands.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Okay.
almost like you're on autopilot. I remember when I was bulimic and I binged and purge all the time, right? So I didn't
Yeah.
wake up in the morning saying, gee, I can't wait to binge and purge. Like that was not on my radar. I was like, I don't want to do that today. But then, I didn't know how to eat. I certainly wasn't eating enough protein. I was in the low fat era, low protein
Right.
era. And all of a sudden, I'm in the grocery store shopping and I just ate 3 donuts, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I just did. And I don't even remember
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah.
People don't even remember doing it.
Yeah.
And then for people in recovery, and this happens, their sponsor, their therapist, their whoever says to them, well, why didn't you use your recovery skills? And the answer is a blank, uh,
I couldn't think
I
of them.
don't know. I forgot.
Right.
And then you ask, well, when was the last time you ate protein? And it turns out that under the influence of adrenaline, Laurie, the prefrontal cortex goes on vacation.
Yeah.
It goes offline. We no longer have access to our recovery skills because this is where they're stored. They're part of executive functioning. And under the influence of adrenaline, executive functioning goes and hangs out on the beach in Hawaii. Okay. And so, of course, we forget to use our recovery skills because they're just not there.
Right.
And most people go out and use or eat sugar.
Yep.
Okay, you may not use cocaine or you may not use alcohol, but ooh, the sugar's there. Ooh, the sugar's there. Ooh, let's have sugar.
Hmm.
And now people are off and running with their sugar addiction.
Yep. And that's why you see people coming out of recovery, right? And they went
Mhm.
from a
The
hard heroin addict
boom.
to they're a sugar and cigarette addict.
And, it's really nice. I've been showing up at some conferences here now for 3 years in a row, and people are coming to me, especially women, and saying, I listened to you last year and I took what you had to say to heart, and I started eating protein every 4 hours. And you know what? I'm not eating sugar anymore. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again, people are coming to my table and saying that. And it's just so wonderful to hear. So here's what protein every 4 hours then does. And we're recommending a minimum of 15 to 20 grams of protein. And I've had people say to me, that's not enough. And that may not be enough for a lot of people, but the reality is it's so much more than most people eat. Other
Right.
people look at me and say, that's so much food.
Yep. Yep.
Well, actually not. But what it does is two things. First of all, it keeps your blood sugar very stable.
Mhm.
And premenstrual women actually should be doing this every 3 hours rather than every 4 hours because blood sugar becomes more dysregulated premenstrually.
Correct.
And most women, when we relapse premenstrually.
Right.
So that's really important. The other thing that protein does is when you digest protein, it turns into our wonderful friends, amino acids. And amino acids go all through our body doing all sorts of marvelous, amazing things. They make our skin and our muscle and our blood cells. They even make our DNA.
Right.
But some of them find their way up here. If there's enough left over, okay, the body wants to keep the heart beating before it wants you to be happy.
True.
So whatever, amino acids you have is going to go to keep you alive first. Then whatever's left over will go up there.
Mm-hmm.
Just the bare minimum to keep us alive. But if we're eating enough protein, there's enough left over for the neurotransmitter precursors, because our neurotransmitters are made out of these amino acids, very specific ones, in fact, in the presence of vitamins and minerals. So by eating this protein every 4 hours, we're getting enough so that the brain can start remaking its neurotransmitters and building the reservoirs of neurotransmitters. So this is why I say that amino acids are anti-addictive.
Yes.
Because over time, rather than, with addictive drugs, right, tolerance builds because it's depleting the neurotransmitters. So you have to take more and more and more to get the same effect.
Right.
With amino acids over time, you get to take less and less to get the same effect because there's enough left over to rebuild a reservoir.
Right. It's beautiful. So beautiful.
So that's how it works.
I love it. So I would love for you to kind of chat about, so we have this protein and it's so basic, right? It's so basic, but if you go to an addiction recovery, like inpatient program, they're not feeding them that.
No,
And,
they're not.
the research is definitely out there. So why aren't they? Why is this not, why, not even the amino acid supplements, just why
But
not
just food.
good food?
Okay, so some programs are. The
Some,
higher programs hire chefs and usually do a decent job in getting real food into their residents.
mm-hmm,
Now, they may not have good protein every 4 hours, but it's available and it's decent.
yeah,
A few programs out there restrict sugar, but most of them don't. And so even with the good food, sugar is very available. And so people will still switch addiction over to sugar just because it's there
right,
and the neurotransmitters are still depleted. The rest of the programs, well, but the problem even with the programs that do feed their people good food and people feel better and it's
yeah,
also wonderful and they leave treatment on this pink cloud. Nobody's told them that one of the reasons they feel better is because of what they were eating.
right, right. There's no
And,
education.
and nobody's taught them how to cook.
That's
So
true.
they go back out and they default to their old, I don't know how to cook. Fast food's pretty good. I like Chick-fil-A, or, I'll just devolve to what I used to eat.
Right,
Well, what you used to eat made you feel like crap.
right.
And it does again. And this is one of the hugest reasons for the enormous relapse rate is because people still have starving brains. Nobody's taught them, and nobody's taught them that
Yep,
what and you eat tremendously matters to your recovery.
right.
So then they go back to treatment and they're eating well again and they're feeling great.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's telling them that it's because they're eating great and nobody's teaching them how to cook. And round and round and round we go. Okay. That's even in the good programs. Now, a few of the good programs actually are doing nutrition training, and that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always as specific as what I teach, but it's still better than nothing. The rest of the programs, Laurie, don't realize that nutrition has anything to do with treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the last thing on their minds. Feeding people is just a chore, a thing that you have to do.
Right, right. And that's really
And
with anything right now. They just don't believe that nutrition is foundational to anything.
Well, it's not even that they don't believe it, it's never occurred to them, and
Yeah.
nobody's ever told them that it matters.
Yeah.
So nobody's ever told the treatment providers that it matters. And so they just basically, what's the cheapest way I can feed people?
Mm-hmm.
And some programs that live off donations, the donations are from Panera, and
Right.
Panera has really, really yummy food. Right. All those wonderful chocolate croissants and,
Right.
right?
Right.
And none of what is what the brain needs to function. But this is the donations they're getting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is what they're dependent upon. And there are not very many grants out there for real food for treatment programs.
Yeah.
So it's a whole systemic issue. But the fact is nobody knows that what and when you eat matters. So I'm showing up at treatment programs, at conferences, saying to these treatment program owners and these sober living housing owners, saying, guess what? If you start feeding your people real food and teaching them why it matters, your relapse rate's going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
And the privately owned programs, the programs with the owners that really care and are really passionate about recovery, want to hear and want to do something different.
Right.
The big corporations, however, are living off the relapses.
Sure. It's about the money there. Yeah,
It's
sadly.
about the money, and they don't actually want to. And if, it sounds to some of you listening like, no, 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 that couldn't possibly be. I've been in conversation, and my colleagues have been in conversation with treatment program owners and executives who have stated that baldly
Very
and
sadly.
said, we can't afford to lower our relapse rate because we need the return business.
Which just makes me so angry, Christina, because we have such a huge, well, I mean, let's just say fentanyl, epidemic right now. I mean, with our young kids, because they're not getting the nutrition in school, they're not being taught that. They're eating, these school lunch programs, Pop-Tarts for breakfast, and then they get on medications because they have ADD and they're anxious and they're depressed, and then they're addicted to sugar, and then that addiction goes into
Mhm.
smoking pot, and then we have sixth graders using fentanyl and dying from this, and we're like, why? Well,
Right.
because their brain is starved. Why do we have school shooters? I mean, this could get really controversial, so I don't know if you
I
two can
agree.
keep this one up here, but
But you see, none of the autopsies of these school shooters that we know about, we don't have access to the autopsy reports, but I seriously doubt that they were looking at the blood sugar levels of the
no,
school shooters. And I pretty much guarantee you from my experience, and I could tell you story after story, that those school shooters have not eaten real food for days, if not years.
right? And you can look at a child and tell.
You can.
You can look at a child and you're like, I know you haven't eaten protein. I know you're addicted to sugar. You can just see it in their face.
Well, not only that, Lori, I can tell it if when somebody walks into my office and now on Zoom, and 5 minutes into the session, I can tell that they haven't eaten protein for 6, 7, 8 hours,
That is
right?
true too. Yes.
And because they're bouncing, they can't
Right.
settle down, they're labile, they're crying, they're all over the place.
Right.
And
Right.
so I've now have 100% sort of success rate, if you want to call it that, because I can now tell to the person if they haven't eaten protein within 4 hours. And so I'll ask, oh, knowing the answer, when's the last time you ate protein today? It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And they say, I had an egg at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I say, that's wonderful. Now, how many hours ago was that? I'm not usually snarky, but
Right.
right. And then I say, may I feed you?
Mm,
I ask, please rate your symptoms right now, whatever they are, on a scale of 0 to 10, and they're 8, 9, 10s, right?
right. Mm-hmm.
And then I say, okay, I'm going to feed you. And I feed them high protein food, whatever it be. Maybe a full blown entree from Trader Joe's or this in my freezer, or a protein shake or a protein bar or a handful of nuts, depending.
Right.
And 15 minutes later, people are grounded, they're thinking,
Mhm.
they're they're coherent, their emotions have settled down, right? And
Yep.
they can fully engage in the session. And
Yeah.
then I have them rate themselves again, and it's threes, fours, fives at the most. And they say, well, I've been talking with you. I say, yeah, but you also feel better because you just fed your brain. So
Right.
we only have to do this 2 or 3 times before people will come into session and sit down and say, you'll be so proud of me, Christina. I ate before I came in. Real food.
Real food. That's awesome.
Right. So
When
it's learned behavior. So I feed my clients in session.
I love that. I don't know many psychotherapists that do that. You might
My
be,
students do.
yes, 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 they do. Yep. I mean, I'm always keeping beef sticks on hand and all those things. So if somebody comes in, but how do you work into the amino acids? Because we're talking just about eating protein, right?
Right.
Um, but sometimes you need more. So that's where the amino acids come in.
You need more. So as I tell my students and my clients, we begin with food and we end with food. But sometimes in the middle, we need purified food.
Mm,
Okay, this is what the amino acids are. This is what the supplements are. They're purified food because sometimes our brain needs a jump start,
yep,
and sometimes our digestion isn't up to par at the beginning
yep.
and it needs some support, and food just simply isn't enough. People are so nutrient deficient for so long that they just can't catch up fast enough with food. And depending upon what substances you've used, sometimes people's digestion is just wrecked.
Yeah.
And so what you do, so this is where we bring in, a good multi, we bring in the fish oil, maybe we bring in some GLA, and now we bring in the aminos.
Mm-hmm.
And again, depending upon the situation, we may bring in a full spectrum amino just to make sure everything's in place. But we use, Julia Ross's amino acid therapy chart as our assessment tool to
Right.
determine what the neurotransmitter depletion is.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, it just lists the depletion symptoms of all the neurotransmitters, and you rate yourself, and we can identify which of the neurotransmitter systems are most suffering. Now, sometimes it's nines and tens across the board. And whenever I see nines and tens across the board, Laurie, I'm
Yeah.
going to assume until I hear differently that this person has not been eating protein or
Clear.
has not been digesting it.
Right.
So when my students, come across with tens across the board, they say, what do I do? Where do I start? So here's what you do. You have your people eat first for 2 weeks, and then you redo the chart and you
Mm,
see what's left over. And at that point, you bring in the targeted amino acid to help whatever the lagging neurotransmitter system is to catch up.
right. Right. That's brilliant.
And some people need to be on aminos for a very long time. I had to be on them for 10 years. Haha. Other people only need to be on them for 6 or 7 months.
Right. Right. I know everybody says, how long do I have to be on these? I'm like, well, some people are good in a very short amount of time, and then others need to be on for an extended amount of time. And I always teach people these are just tools. So there's always going to be stresses in your life. There's a death in the family. Maybe you fall and break your hip. Maybe there's things that will deplete our bodies. And then we just use these amino acids,
And
along
that's
with
when
a good
you just
diet.
need more
Yeah.
in the sort of like spot treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when
Yeah.
we had some death in our family, and I was down in the DPA and all the time just because I just needed more of it during that time. And it was
Mhm.
life-saving. It's good.
A friend of mine was at the conference, and we were both taking down our exhibit tables at the same time. And I already knew that the day before she had been at a funeral all day
Mm,
for the death of her best friend's husband, who's also a very good friend of hers. And then she had to get up on stage that night and give a whole presentation. And then the next day, she had to show up and talk to people and then take down her exhibit booth. I went over her and I said, how are you? She
Mm.
said, well, I'm kind of holding on. And I had actually brought my bottle of DPA and DLPA with
Huh?
me. And I said, I don't want to be obnoxious. She already knew about aminos,
Yeah.
but sometimes we use up our endorphins past what their capacity, like what you're going through right now. May I please give you some?
And she said, yes, please.
She was so grateful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I gave her what was left of my bottle of DPA and a handful of DLPA and a handful of diphenylamine, and she was so grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so easy. It's so easy,
Yeah.
Christina. It's just pieces of protein that build the brain, build the body, and
Yeah.
amazing things happen. And then you teach people how to eat correctly. And it doesn't have to be all of this complicated
No, no.
stuff.
And it doesn't have to be keto.
It doesn't have to be keto. It doesn't have to be carnivore. It doesn't have to be paleo. You
No,
just
for
eat
a few
fine.
people it does.
Yep.
Few people it does. For everybody else, we just need to eat well and consistently and avoid the addictive stuff,
Right.
which becomes so much easier to avoid when you're eating well and consistently.
So much, so much easier. Yeah. So where does medication come into all this? So I'm sure you do as well. I see, majority of the people that come to see me have been on or are currently on an SSRI or some other psychotropic
Mhm.
medication. Most of the people are probably pre-diabetic.
Or 3 or 4.
Yeah, or 3 or 4. Exactly. So how do we work around with the protein and the amino acids and
Okay,
maybe even
so
let's just take a step back first. For thousands of years, we did well, our brain did well on our
food.
diet, on food. And then it didn't. I mean, we had the Industrial Revolution, so the crappy food, Kellogg's, all those kind of things. Um, but we still weren't in the condition that we're in until we hit 90s, the
Mhm.
1990s, right? When all these medications came out. What changed?
Taking a pill is so much easier than feeding yourself, Lori.
I knew you were going to say that.
And the pharmaceutical companies, they have one goal, and that's to get rich.
Yeah.
And so you kind of put that together and you end up with a disaster. You add then the low fat craze, which the
Oh,
sugar
yeah.
companies, right? And sugar is a publicly traded commodity.
Mhm.
And so, the sugar companies had to keep sugar. And so they said, oh, fat's bad. We're good. Fat's bad, right? When it was
Right.
just the opposite. And so people ended up with starving brains
Yeah.
and symptoms.
I was one of them.
Here's something that most people don't know. Most people don't know that the lower your total cholesterol goes, the more likely you are to die of suicide.
Right? People don't know that. I'm telling people that all the time, Christina. Can you say that again? Because I don't know that I've said that actually on a podcast. Say it again.
Okay. Okay. It's important to find out how low your total cholesterol is, not just how high it is, because the lower cholesterol goes below 170,
Hmm.
maybe 160, maybe you got that 10 point, little fuzzy place, but below 160, the lower it goes, the more likely are, and they have lots and lots and lots of studies on this,
Hmm.
to have increased depression, all the way to increased successful suicide. I mean,
Right.
we don't want to call suicide successful, but everybody knows what I mean by that. And one big population study found that depression, death by suicide, homicide, and accidents rose considerably in a population that had the lowest cholesterol level.
Yeah.
So all these people being treated by statins,
Yep.
especially middle-aged people, middle-aged women, middle-aged men being treated by statins,
Yeah.
are at risk for life-threatening depression.
Yes. Yeah.
And everybody needs to know this. The cardiologists don't appear to know this. And the other really tragic thing is that over the last 30 years, I don't know how long, the the bottom line of normal for cholesterol keeps dropping.
Mm-hmm.
I think it used to be, don't have my numbers perfect here, but it used to be anything up to 200, cholesterol up to 200, even 220 was fine, normal, not a problem. And
Right.
then it dropped, and then it dropped, and then it dropped, and now it's dropping even more.
Right.
Well, why? Probably so that the pharmaceutical companies can sell more statins.
Right.
Because there's no research that shows that lowering your cholesterol level actually saves your life,
Exactly. There is no
actually
research.
extends your life. Okay, that research is not there.
Nope.
And so for this research driven, era we're in, they don't have the research.
No.
But research shows that the lower your cholesterol drops, the more at risk you are for mental health issues
Yeah,
and suicide. Now that's terrifying.
it is. It is terrifying.
It
You're
is.
more at risk for stroke, hemorrhaging. I mean, all those things. So,
Well, and so people ask, well, what does cholesterol do?
mhm.
We know the bad stuff, which it kind of sort of doesn't, but um, it coats every single neuron. It is what causes creates the myelin sheath and the axons to send nerve signals everywhere. And we know what happens with MS when you have a broken myelin sheath, right? So, but cholesterol also pulls toxins out of your body. It's very crucial to pull toxins out of your body.
Yeah.
And cholesterol also is what we make our adrenal and reproductive hormones out of.
So we need them. We need cholesterol.
We need cholesterol. We need it so badly.
And sometimes that's even
Um,
why it goes up as we age, because we're just
mhm.
needing more resources to support our hormone production for our brain health. It's a beautiful thing. And it helps with wrinkles and everything.
It sure does. It
Yeah.
sure does. So anyway, where were we? We got off on this cholesterol thing because I know. Um, so what happened? So the drugs came in to now medicate very real symptoms. What a lot of people don't realize is that most of these medications are dependency forming. And basically, they're also tolerance forming, so that over time you need more and more to get the same effect.
Yeah, I
And they
don't think
stop
people realize that.
working.
Yeah.
They stop working, but you can't get off them because you become physiologically dependent on them.
Right.
And then so the doctor brings in one more and one more, and well, maybe those aren't working enough, but you can't get off them. So now we're going to bring in this, antipsychotic medication because maybe that's what you need. And OMG.
Right.
And then people try to get off them, and their symptoms get so much worse because most doctors try to get people off their medication way, way too fast.
Fast. Yeah.
And I don't know if this has been your experience, Laurie, but so doctors put people on a fast taper schedule. They go into acute withdrawal, they're miserable. They come to their nutritionist or their therapist and they complain about how miserable they are. And then I ask them, well, have you told your doctor? No.
No,
Why not? Well, I don't want to tell my doctor.
because I don't
So
want to go back on my med. Right. They're
the
like, I don't want to.
doctor doesn't get the feedback.
Right.
The doctor doesn't know that their taper schedule is too fast because nobody's telling them.
So true. Yes.
They're telling the nutritionist and they're telling the therapist, but they're not telling the doctor. So it continues and continues and continues. So I cannot give medical advice, but I can give my medical opinion.
Yes.
And so what I tell my clients is, oh, the doctor wants you to cut your pill in half this week and then cut it in half next week, and then you're done. Well, when my clients do that, they end up with pretty severe withdrawal symptoms.
Mhm.
And what my clients have found, I'm not giving medical advice.
Mhm.
What my clients have found is that when they um, go no faster than a 10% drop per week, their body can manage that. And
Right,
then we bring in the right amino acid to be rebuilding that particular neurotransmitter system. And that reduces withdrawal symptoms even more. And now you can move yourself. I'm not doing the moving. You
Mhm.
can move yourself off the medication onto the amino acids and
Right.
food.
And food.
Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. So, and some people really need to stay on their meds for a while. And so we do this amino acid dance
Mm-hmm.
around the meds. And if somebody's on 5, 6, 7 meds, we don't dance, we just feed.
We just feed.
Because guess what? The medications work better on a well-fed brain
Yes.
because they actually have to have some raw material in there in order to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And the raw material only comes from the food we eat. So a well-fed brain responds better to medication,
Right.
right? So
Right.
sometimes you have to start there. And then all of a sudden the meds start working. And then they can start weaning off 1 or 2 or 3 because they're actually feeling better.
Right.
And now we can start our little amino acid dance,
Which is really fun.
which is so much fun. Yes,
So much fun. Oh my gosh. We could talk for hours, I think, on this.
we
Um,
certainly could.
we could. But is there anything you want to leave my listeners with? One last thing.
I have a little 6-hour introductory stick your toe in the water course
Mm-hmm.
that happens live about once a month, but will also be on demand. It's
Okay.
called Discover the Power of Nutrition and Recovery. It's a wonderful little course, and you get the full recording as well as lots and lots of handouts and materials and assessment tools. It's great. And then if you really want to learn more, we've got your course. We've got my full 2-level certification program
Mhm.
where we apply all the tenets of functional medicine to mental health and addiction for that little tiny 20% of people for whom amino acid therapy doesn't work,
Right?
because there is this very small group
There
of
is.
people for whom it
Mhm.
doesn't work.
Yep.
And that's because there's all these other things going on that you have to address first.
Yes.
So I teach people how to do that.
That's awesome. I'm so excited. So go get Christina's course, dip your toe in course, and check out everything else she has to offer. Um, I think everybody could use amino acid therapy, whether you have an addiction or not. Like I use amino acids
Absolutely.
100% of my clients.
I never had a substance abuse disorder. Okay, that was not where my issues lay. However, I was depressed from day one,
Yep.
and I had 9 different causes to my depression. One of which was low catecholamine, so I needed tyrosine.
Mm-hmm.
The other of which was low serotonin, so I needed 5-HTP.
Mm-hmm.
And then I needed the omega-3s, and then I needed GLA, and then I needed to get and stay off eggs and corn and gluten.
Yeah.
And then I needed thyroid support.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was okay.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of factors going on here. And so it's not just, there's no one magic pill. You have to
No,
look at your body from head to toe and address things from different angles so that you can have optimal health because we have such a sick nation right now.
yeah,
And,
we do.
Christina and I don't have all the answers, but I think we have a lot of them.
We at least we have the starting point.
We do, right? We do.
Uh,
And it's just a lot of fun. And I just get to watch people's bodies do what they're designed to do by God all the time. And so,
yeah.
um, thank you for sharing your wisdom and for just, being willing to bless my audience. So we'll have to do this again.
We will. Thank you for having me and for everything you're doing as well, Lori. It's really magnificent.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. And I will see you in the next episode. God bless.